What if I told you that your most haunting memories, the ones that make your heart race and your palms sweat literally just by thinking about them, actually aren't permanent fixtures in your mind? For decades, we've kind of thought of our deepest fears and traumas as this rigid, unchangeable code etched right into our brains. But modern neuroscience is revealing something absolutely incredible. This isn't permanent code at all. It's actually highly flexible hardware, just waiting to be rewritten. Welcome to this explainer on the architecture of courage.
Think about the things that really trigger you, that intense physiological response, the sudden anxiety, that overwhelming urge to just freeze or run away. That's what neurobiologists call a threat reflex. Right now, it might feel like it's completely running your life, but as we're going to see, science shows us that this reflex is really just a generic biological response. It's an automatic loop, and the best part, it can actually be hacked, fundamentally altered, and ultimately mastered.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway right off the bat is this: you aren't broken. I really want that to sink in. When your heart rate spikes, or you feel totally paralyzed by a memory, that is not a flaw in your design. No way. Your intense reactions are actually a brilliant ancient survival mechanism. Your brain is literally just trying to keep you alive based on past data. But because we are wired to survive, we also have the biological capacity to learn how to control this exact wiring.
To rewrite the code, we first have to understand the hardware. Let's meet the biological symphony of fear, the HPA axis. Basically, when your brain senses danger, this little almond-shaped structure called the amygdala sounds the alarm. Instantly, signals shoot down to your adrenal glands and they just dump adrenaline and cortisol straight into your bloodstream. Your heart races, your vision narrows, your breathing quickens. All the systems that aren't essential for immediate survival, like digestion or complex rational thought, they just shut down completely. That is the threat reflex in action.
Now here is where things get a bit tricky. Have you ever wondered why you have to practice a piano scale like 100 times to actually learn it, but you only need to get into one bad car accident to be terrified of driving for years? Well, this is called one-trial learning. Your brain sets a permanent nervous system tripwire after a single intense negative experience. It wires the memory to the threat reflex instantly. Why? Because biologically, if the threat is lethal, you probably wouldn't survive a second trial to learn from it.
Think of normal learning kind of like a slow, dial-up internet connection. In neuroscience, strengthening connections between neurons is called long-term potentiation. Normal learning takes tons of repetition and time to build. But a trauma circuit? Man, because of the massive dump of chemicals like adrenaline during a highly stressful event, your brain instantly upgrades that connection. It lays down a high-speed 5G Ethernet cable straight to your fear center.
But here is the profound secret that modern neuroscience has uncovered over the last decade or so. Because this biological circuit is generic, meaning it activates the exact same physiological alarm whether you're facing a literal physical attack or just giving a public speech, it's highly flexible. The threat reflex is, for lack of a better word, dumb. It doesn't actually know what to be afraid of until a memory tells it to be. And thanks to neuroplasticity, this means the circuit can actually be run in reverse to systematically unlearn a fear.
And this brings us to your ultimate biological superpower, the prefrontal cortex. Located right behind your forehead, this is your top-down processing center. It's the part of your brain that makes meaning, creates narratives, and importantly, it acts as a literal brake on those primitive threat reflexes generated by the amygdala. Through conscious effort and narrative, your prefrontal cortex can actually send inhibitory signals down to the fear center and tell it to stand down.
So, how exactly do we use that brake? Well, science maps out a very specific three-step cognitive behavioral sequence required to completely dismantle a fear circuit. First up is extinction, which involves repetitively recounting the memory. Second is relearning a new narrative. And third, and this is arguably the most important, attaching a positive reward to it. Let's break down exactly how this happens.
Step 1 is extinction. When you recount a traumatic story in a safe environment, those first few times your HPA axis goes crazy. Your heart rate spikes just like you're reliving it right then and there. But as you repetitively retell the specific details, really engaging that prefrontal cortex, you systematically lower the amplitude of the threat reflex. You aren't forgetting what happened, but you are uncoupling the biological alarm from the memory. You are literally turning a terrible, upsetting nightmare into a terrible, but physiologically boring story.
But here's the thing, extinction isn't quite enough. Just making the story boring leaves a bit of a void. To truly erase the trauma, you have to move to the next phase. You must replace the fear with a new, positive event. You've got to attach a sense of reward and victory to the very thing that once paralyzed you. If a car accident made you fear driving, you don't just get used to sitting in a parked car. You have to eventually drive somewhere you absolutely love, safely, to wire new positive dopamine responses right over those old fear circuits.
Now, as we navigate this whole process of rewiring, we really have to look at our environment. Science reveals a vital truth here. Social isolation actually fuels the chemicals that keep you afraid. When we're traumatized or scared, our natural instinct is to hide, right? To pull away. But the biology of our brains dictates that trying to rewrite your hardware completely alone is fighting a massive uphill chemical battle. Let me introduce you to a molecule called tachykinin. When you experience stress and trauma, your brain produces this chemical right in the amygdala, and it actively increases your feelings of fear, anxiety, and irritability. And here is the real kicker. Neuroscientists have found that social isolation massively amplifies the production of tachykinin. Without a trusted support system, your brain literally brews the exact chemicals that reinforce the trauma circuits we are desperately trying to break. Crazy, right?
But luckily, there is an antidote. Connection suppresses the circuits of fear. Positive social interaction, I'm talking about simply being around people you trust, sharing a meal, having a good conversation, chemically suppresses tachykinon. It speeds up neurological healing and physically lowers the biological volume of your anxiety. You do not have to do this alone, and biologically speaking, you really shouldn't. Your tribe is your shield.
Okay, so we've covered the power of narrative, the prefrontal cortex, and the absolute necessity of social connection. But that leads us to a massive question. What if you need something actionable today? What is the most potent, science-backed tool for instantly regaining control over your physiological response and recalibrating a hyperactive fear system right now?
The answer lies in a single number: 5. Recent, absolutely groundbreaking neuroscience research points to just 5 minutes a day of deliberate action. Just 5 minutes can actively reverse years of chronic fear, depressive symptoms, and an overactive stress response. It sounds entirely counterintuitive, I know, but it is one of the most powerful hacks for human biology discovered in recent years.
Let's dive straight into the mechanics. This is the 5-minute protocol, which is specifically a form of deliberate cyclic hyperventilation. Here's how it works. You take a very deep inhale through your nose, followed by a quick exhale through your mouth. You repeat this vigorously for about 25 to 30 breaths. Then, you fully exhale all the air and just hold your breath for 25 to 60 seconds with your lungs completely empty. Then you repeat this entire cycle for exactly 5 minutes. Now, fair warning, doing this will make you feel agitated. It's going to make your heart race. It will literally release adrenaline into your system.
So you're probably wondering, why on earth would we intentionally spike our adrenaline to cure fear? Well, because deliberately self-directing your entry into a stressed state recalibrates the threat reflex. You have an alarm system in your brain called the insula that constantly measures your internal stress against the outside world. By using your prefrontal cortex to intentionally step into a stressful physiological state, you prove to your nervous system that you are at the wheel. You're teaching your brain that a spike in heart rate and adrenaline isn't something to panic over because you caused it and you control it.
We spend so much of our lives running away from the physiological feeling of fear, but modern neuroscience shows us that the architecture of courage isn't about eliminating stress, it's about mastering it. By using narrative, relying on your tribe, and deliberately exposing yourself to controlled stress, you can literally rewire those high-speed Ethernet connections of your past traumas. The hardware is flexible, guys. The tools are right there in your hands. So the only question left to ask is this: are you ready to step into the stress to find your peace?